Zaffa Publishing presents The Nursemaid's Secret, written by Sheila Newberry and read by Webster. This audiobook is brought to you by Memory Lane, a special community for the very best saga writing from authors you know and love, and new ones we can't wait for you to meet. Join us today at memorylane.club. Part 1. 1894 to 1897. 1. Tilly set down the flat irons in the hearth with a satisfied little sigh. The kitchen was steamy, her forehead damp from her exertions, her back aching, but she hauled the airer aloft with a light heart. It was always a pleasure to press Mrs. Augusta's fine linen, she thought. There had been even more ironing than usual, for they would be departing from Brixton very shortly for the Christmas visit to Norfolk. Tilly was really looking forward to that. It would be almost a holiday for her, too, for she wouldn't be expected to clean and cook in the family farmhouse. Mind you, she would still have to look after Mrs. Augusta and her young daughter Gussie. Maid of all work, the servants in the neighbouring houses dubbed Tilly Reader. She knew, but it didn't worry her, for hadn't Augusta Quayle, her autocratic employer, given Tilly that vital chance to make something of her life when well aware of the painful secret in Tilly's short past? The pale, undernourished, bewildered 15-year-old of almost 7 years ago had become the tall, shapely, confident young woman of today. Tilly might possess sore, chapped hands, for the soda in the washing-up water did not only dissolve grease on pots and pans, she often thought ruefully, but her crown of golden hair, as bright as a new penny, and her pretty, smiling face turned many heads, although she was quite unaware of it. Her mistress had been a teacher for many years. She had recognized Tilly's quick intelligence, fed and encouraged it too. How often had Tilly bitten her lip and blinked away the tears in the early days, when Mrs. Augusta had been forever correcting her slipshod speech or pouncing upon the incorrectly laid cutlery with a sharp, "Will you never learn?" What a tartar she must have been at that school, Tilly often thought. Books were thrust at her when wearily she made her way up those winding attic stairs to bed. Obediently, she had yawned her way through a chapter each night, for she knew that she would be questioned as to what she had absorbed the following morning. But to her joy, the educational tomes had at last given way to the novel, and Mrs. Augusta had Catholic tastes in literature. Tilly had read Jane Eyre compulsively until her candle flickered and died at dawn. Jane Eyre had suffered as a child too, and Tilly just had to make sure that there was a happy ending after all. She hung her holland apron on the hook on the kitchen door, smoothed down her black dress, and donned her frilly apron. Time to serve afternoon tea, 10 minutes later than usual. She paused in the vast hallway to check in the ornate mirror that her cap was straight. Then she smiled spontaneously at the huge portrait of Mrs. Augusta's revered late husband, George. "I do wish I'd known you, Mr. George," she whispered. "I just know you wouldn't have terrified me, as Mrs. Augusta does sometimes. Thank goodness Gussie takes after you." Pushing open the double doors, she wheeled the trolley into the drawing-room. It was a grand room, with much ruby-red plush, spindly-legged uncomfortable chairs, and a stiff-backed sofa, where Mrs. Augusta sat, clearly waiting for her refreshment. Several occasional tables, draped in lacy cloths, displayed small pieces of valuable porcelain. Gloomy dark pictures in massive frames jostled for space on the flock paper which covered the walls. Tilly never felt at ease in this room. Gussie was curled up in the basket chair by the window, her head bent over her sketching block as usual. She was a quiet, dreamy child, and Tilly was very fond of her. The fire needed making up, Tilly saw immediately. The curtains must be drawn, and then the pleasure of pressing down the switch to illuminate the room with the wonderful new electric light. "You're late, Tilly," Augusta observed sharply. Big-boned she was, tightly corseted, handsome in her sweeping, deep, blue velveteen dress, which showed off her startling auburn hair and pale skin. She possessed curious, hooded eyes, appearing blue now because of the colour she wore, but more often grey. Tilly lit the spirit lamp immediately, first things first. "I filled the tea kettle with hot water from the range, Mrs. Augusta," she said soothingly. "It shouldn't take long. I wanted to finish off the ironing, to get everything aired before I start..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?